later, but that you need to really consider how can you best use your time for God's glory and for your good and the good of others. A fourth element is what I would call effective people skills. And I'm very deliberate in my choice of words here in terms of efficient time management and effective people skills. Because I think you're efficient with time and with projects, but you're effective with people. And another thing I've learned in 15 years of being a manager and having hired many, many people is that people skills are hard to teach. It's a lot easier for me to teach technical skills. It's a lot easier for me to teach processes, to teach procedures, and teach other elements of doing their job. But to teach good people skills, just to relate well to people, to listen well, to know how to communicate with people in the ways that they want to talk and need to be understood, to be able to show people that you really care about what their concerns are. And working at a large bank, we're in a client service, customer service business, and if you don't focus on the client, you're not going to be in business very long. But almost every business has clients of some sort. And how do you relate to those people in a godly way? And how are you going to be effective with them? And the quote I have here from George Herbert, that good words are worth much and cost little. And really trying to use your words as freely and generously as possible to encourage people. A fifth principle for working with integrity is perseverance. Every job has challenges, every job has demands. For me, in working 20 years at the same company, in the same building, in a few different floors, and a few different desks, there's a lot of days that are not very exciting. And yet, I believe that for most of us, God calls us to persevere in the work that He calls us to be part of. It can be very easy to think that the grass is going to be greener someplace else. Sometimes it is. I've been amazed at how many people I've rehired over the years. That they've left our company because they just didn't think it was a good place to work, and 6 months later, they said, I'd really like to come back. It really was a much better company than I thought it was. And I think there's an important element here of persevering in what God calls you to do and not giving up too quickly. I was mentioning to Michael that a good friend of mine just recently left Pepsi from their marketing group and took on what for him was a very exciting opportunity with another smaller company that is going to enable him to get into some international marketing and other things. And he was only on the job for 1 month when he sent me this help email. Bruce, they lied to me. This job is not at all what I thought it was going to be. And one of the things I told him is, Mark, you just got to persevere. You got to at least go through this process and see what God has planned for you here. And it may be that God is going to call you back to Pepsi, or God is going to call you someplace else. But at least you got to give this job a chance before you jump ship. And the sixth basic principle for working with integrity is sweating the small stuff. And I like the quote here from Lawrence Bell, that show me someone who cannot bother to do the little things, and I'll show you someone who cannot be trusted to do big things. There's a tendency in our society for people to think they're all ready for executive responsibilities, that within 6 months they're ready to take over whatever company they're working for, which is kind of amazing to me, just the kind of attitude some people can have. And I'm not saying that's true for everyone or true for all Christians, but it is something that you really have to be careful with, because you really need to learn a job well before you're going to be ready to move on to new jobs. And that's something that is hard. You have to pay your dues in most jobs. You've got to pay your dues. And that's a hard thing, as it was for me initially coming out of college, and I think it is for others. And for me, I think I learned the importance of sweating the small stuff with my very first job when I got to the Northern Trust Company. I was hired as a space planning coordinator. It was in the Human Resources Department. My nickname was the Space Cadet. And what they asked me to do was they wanted me to move 1,000 people to a new building. And they wanted me to do it in 6 months. And I had no real background in this. I sort of thought I wanted to be in human resources management, and this was working with a lot of people. And so I had to work with all these managers of these 1,000 people. I had to work with the corporate properties people, I had to work with the moving people, the computer people, the telephone people, put together schedules and floor plans, and then move these people in 6 months. And I have enough trouble just moving myself, every few years, much less trying to move 1,000 people. But there was an incredible amount of details. But I really was determined that I was going to learn the details and I was going to do it. And purely by God's grace, the move went well. All 1,000 people got moved within 6 months into the places that they were supposed to go. And I learned during that time that I never wanted to move anybody again. And I was fortunate that I got enough positive feedback from the people that I worked with that I got accepted into an accelerated training program that led to being in the personal trust department where I've been for the last 18 years at the Northern. But I believe that details matter and that you need to be willing to sweat the small stuff. The second area of witness, and these next two areas I'm going to cover a little more quickly, is not just witnessing with our labors, but witnessing with our lives. And here you see this in Daniel's life, in Daniel 6. And I quoted an excerpt here. Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, and this was the decree published that everyone had to worship the king and they could not pray to anyone else, he immediately, 3 times a day, he got down on his knees and he prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. And this was all part of the plan of his co-workers who were envious and jealous of him and sort of suggesting to the king that these laws be passed. And there's several lessons here I think we can learn from this. One is, who do we serve as our manager? It was clear that Daniel was serving his heavenly manager, that was the person that he was going to please. And he wasn't willing to give up his prayer life for even one day. I find that very convicting. How easily I might give up my own devotional life for days at a time. And here Daniel wasn't willing to give it up even for one day when it would cost him his power, his prestige, and even his life. And over the years I've had many different earthly managers, but ultimately as Christians we have one heavenly manager, and we need to continually remind ourselves of who we're working for, that we're working for the Lord and not for men. Another witness of our lives is just how we relate to our co-workers and our clients. And I've kind of alluded to this earlier, but it's so important that every day in your job, or wherever God has called you, and being a student is work, is a vocation, to always be thinking about how can you encourage someone, how can you speak God's love to the people around you. And I know for me, that has been really getting to know my clients, really getting to know them and their children, getting to know all of my co-workers, not just those on my staff, but the people in the cafeteria, the security guards, the cleaning ladies, and really trying to care for them in whatever way God leads me to do that. That I believe that God wants us to love people. That's the second great commandment. And whatever job you're in, you need to find a way to be able to love them and treat them with dignity and respect. A third witness of our lives is how do you deal with difficulties? I've always liked the quote from Henry Kissinger, there cannot be a crisis next week. My schedule is already full. That's something I've certainly felt at times in my life. And how you deal with difficulties says a lot about your Christian character. And it's also a great opportunity. I know for me, when my second son was born 5 years ago, it was a very difficult time for me and my wife. He was born about 10 weeks early, was in intensive care for a couple of months, had some significant development issues, and the first couple of days they weren't sure if he was even going to live. And by God's grace and God's goodness, he's developed and he's doing very well today. He still needs to learn a few more social skills, but he's doing extremely well. We're very, very blessed.